Have you ever heard this sound on your radio? That's FT8. In this video, I'm going to show you what FT8 is, how to set up the software to get involved with this awesome amateur radio mode, and I'm also going to give you a little bonus tip on how I get an instant view of what HF bands are open using FT8. Okay, so what is FT8? FT8 stands for Frankie Taylor Design. Now that's Joe Taylor K1JT and Steve Frankie K9AN. They're the creators of this mode, and it is an 8-frequency shift keying modulation mode, and it's bundled within the WSJT-X software. So according to Joe Taylor, the mode was actually designed for multi-hop sporadic E, where signals are weak and fading, they're of short duration, and it was designed so that you could transmit the minimum amount of information required for a QSO. So even though it was designed for multi-hop sporadic E, it actually made its way to HF and people started to use it on HF. And from there, its popularity just exploded and it quickly became the most popular mode within WSJT-X. In fact, I've even used FT8 on bands as high as 3.4 gigahertz. More on that later. So what's its appeal? Why is FT8 so popular? Well, with challenging propagation conditions, higher noise levels in urban environments, it's becoming a real issue. QRP, low power operation, and even compromised antenna situations, you can still have worldwide contacts using FT8. Now, I know that some hate FT8. They say that it's computers talking to computers, that there's no real human interaction. It's true that FT8 is not a conversational mode. It's sort of a bare essentials, a bare minimum exchange of information between two stations to effectively confirm a QSO, effectively confirm a contact. That's what it was designed for. Okay, so let's have a look at what a typical FT8 QSO would look like. So in my example here, I have got my call sign. I'm calling CQ. I send this as the first message, CQ VK7HH QE37, which is my grid square. That's the first thing that I would do, is I would call CQ. Then I would receive a signal back, or decode a signal back rather, VK7HH KM9G EN35. So that's Steve KM9G calling me with his grid square. Once I receive and I decode that, then the program would send KM9G VK7HH -10. I'm sending him a signal report of -10. Then he would respond back with VK7HH KM9G R -5. Now the R is Roger, I have received your signal report. Now the signal report, my signal report to you is -5 because of course I'll have the stronger signal. Then KM9G VK7HH, this is me transmitting again. I would send Roger, Roger 73. So I've confirmed everything and I've said 73s to acknowledge. Then Steve would send VK7HH KM9G 73, and that would be the end of the QSO. So that's a typical QSO. Now each transmit and receive sequence is about 15 seconds. So you can have a QSO in around about a minute or so. FT8 transmissions can be decoded -21 dB below the noise floor. Now to give you some sort of indication, CW requires about another 10 or 15 dB to be able to copy. So it's a very weak signal mode. So that's a basic rundown of what FT8 is. So let's go over and jump into the software so that I can show you how to make a QSO. First thing, timing. Make sure that your computer has an appropriate time synchronization program installed. There's a lot of timing that goes into WSJT-X, and signals need to be within a second or so, otherwise they won't be decoded. So the easiest way to do that is to download a program. So I use NetTime, timesynctool.com. Here it's free, and if I actually open it up, I can show you what it looks like. Here it is. It's going to synchronize again in another 4 minutes. Once you download it and install it, very simple. Just go to settings. You can leave the default host names here. You can change the time servers if you really want to, but I just change the update interval to every 15 minutes. I think this is set to every couple of hours by default. Just change it to 15 minutes, and then it will update automatically for you, and your computer time should always be pretty good. All right, so I've started up WSJT-X, and I'll go through some of the settings that I had to set up when I first installed it. I won't go into too much detail. You can have a look at some of my settings and you can copy them if you want, if it makes it a little bit easier. So the first thing, once WSJT-X is installed, you do need to go into File and then Settings, and you need to configure your particular radio. So mine's an IC7300. Your radio might differ. I've also done videos on that on my channel as well, so check that out for the common radios such as the 7300, the 705, the FT991A as well I've also done. Apart from that, once you've got everything set up and you start receiving, the first thing you should look at is the signal meter down here on the left hand side. Now you can see that mine is sitting at around about 66 dB. If you hover over that, it says 30 dB recommended when only noise is present, and at the moment it's receiving signals. If we turn up the radio, we can hear that we're hearing signals, so that's why that is quite high. So if you want just noise present, just disconnect the antenna, set it to about 30 dB, and then go from there. Green is good, red's when it's clipping, yellow when there isn't enough audio. So you can adjust the audio appropriately coming into your PC. Now, the next thing to do is to go to mode and make sure that FT8 mode is selected. So we've got all the different modes, but the one that we're talking about today is FT8. So that will make sure that the program is in the correct mode for you to decode. Now you can see across this waterfall, there are lots and lots of signals at the moment. It looks like Europe is open. Now, I've done a few things here, just a very, very quick tip. You'll see some of these are highlighted in different colors. They've actually got the countries listed in here. If you go to File, Settings, Colors, here you can tick what you want to display in this window. So at the moment I've got, if it's a new DXCC, a new continent, also my call. So I think this is set by default, but just make sure. So by enabling that, it means that if someone calls you, you'll see it. Green is CQ and yellow is you transmitting. So that's just some of the basic settings that I've got set. So I can just look at that real quickly and I can say, oh, new DXCC, new CQ, new continent, etc. And I can go and work them. So that's the band activity on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side is the particular what you're receiving on your receive frequency. So you can see down here that I have a receive frequency of 1196 Hertz. Now that corresponds up here on the waterfall. You can see this little tab up here. There is a red marker and there's also a green marker. The green marker is your receive frequency and the red marker is your transmit frequency. And if you adjust it down here, say I put in 1500, then the green marker moves. If I move the transmit marker to also to 1500, the red marker also moves. Now you can also change frequencies by clicking. Now if you click at the top of the waterfall, that will only change your receive frequency. If you hold Control and click, this will change both transmit and receive. So transmit and receive will follow one another. So that's handy if you want to find a clear frequency, you can move very, very easily. Now, my waterfall, as you can see here, it's not set up like this after you install WSJT-X. This is the way that I like the waterfall. You might be different, but I can see signals quite easily by just setting it up this way. So these are the settings that I've got. Bins per pixel 4. I start the waterfall at 200 Hertz. I set this just below 50%. What's that? Waterfall gain, just under 50%. Waterfall 0, I set just a fraction above 50%. I leave spectrum gain alone and I leave spectrum 0. Spectrum is set to 30%. Default, palette, and cumulative. And then that's what we'll get there. So you get this nice representation of what's happening with the waterfall. And you can also drag this in and out to represent how far in the spectrum you want. But I usually leave it at about 200 Hertz to 3000. It's most of the signals are going to be in this range here. On the right here now, I've started to receive some signals on my receive frequency. Obviously, I've been moving it around while I've been doing this demo, but here we go. We've got here 1406, so I'm sitting roughly on 1406 up here in the waterfall. CQVK 4X1YS in Israel. I've never worked Israel before. I should be working him, but I'm doing this YouTube video. But anyway, all good. I'm sure I'll work Israel again another day. I haven't got them in the log. That's the basics of receiving signals that are current and seeing what signals are currently on the band. Now, as far as transmitting is concerned, when you double click on a station, so let's choose this Israel station, for instance. I don't want to transmit just yet, but the radio will start transmitting, and you can see here transmit, and it is sending that his call, my call, the grid square, like we mentioned before about the basic QSO. Now what happens is down here in the right hand side, it generates these standard messages. Now if you have auto sequence ticked, it will go through these one at a time as you receive the relevant signal back. So you can untick auto sequence and you can do all this manually, or you can leave that ticked. I recommend leaving it ticked because then you can follow along and you won't miss anything in case you get a signal report and you don't see it, because sometimes this window scrolls really, really quickly and you won't see it. So just leave auto sequence turned on. So what would happen is I would call him. If he heard me, he would respond with a signal report. This button would then jump down to Roger +6, and then he would send me a Roger Roger 73, and then I would send a 73, and all that would happen within the space of a minute. QSO complete. So that's the basics of what responding to a CQ would be. Now, if you want to call CQ, you can see here that we've got all the frequencies listed, and it would take, you just wouldn't be able to keep up with what frequency is clear. So that's why the waterfall is really handy. So what I would normally do is if I'm calling CQ, I would find a spare spot on the waterfall. So up here, it looks like I've looked, there's a couple of sequences here. There's a station maybe there, but it looks like it's rather clear in here. I would then move my frequency up to here, and then I would simply call CQ. And so just by ticking the bottom box down the bottom here, CQ, VK7HH, QE37, enable transmit, it would start transmitting. Now, call first here, if that is ticked, that will automatically respond to the first person that the software decodes that has responded to your CQ. So you might have 2, 3, 4, maybe a dozen stations responding to your CQ call. The first one that WSJT-X decodes will be the first one that it responds to. Once you've finished the QSO, it doesn't automatically go to the next station. It doesn't automatically start transmitting. Your transmit is actually disabled. So you have to go in and you have to set to call that other station that has called you initially with that CQ. So it's not an automatic thing where you can just leave it and it'll just make contacts all day while you're not sitting in front of the PC. So that's basically a CQ, calling CQ and getting a response. Now, there is a little button here, TX even first. Mine's currently ticked. The good thing about WSJT-X is that if you hover over any of these, it'll tell you what it is. So this will tell you whether to transmit in even numbered minutes or sequences, or to transmit in odd numbered sequences. And that's just to stop clashes between yourself and the other stations that you might be calling. On HF, it's not really that much of a difference because there's stations just transmitting on all sorts of odds and evens. But on the higher bands, on 10 meters and 6 meters, it might make quite a big difference because you don't want to be clashing with stations on the other end who might be transmitting at the exact same time as you, because you're not going to decode them. So other things that are interesting here, you can obviously change frequency here in WSJT-X. You've got the frequency here. If you've got a radio which is cat controlled, as soon as you change frequencies here, it automatically changes the radio. When you double click on a call sign, the call sign is populated here with its grid, and you can see the azimuth to you, so that's handy if you've got a Yagi antenna or a beam. You've also got the how far away it is. All right, so let's do a real live demo here. I've got my radio all set up, ready to go on 20 meters. Let's call CQ. So I've got my clear frequency here at 2500 or 2550. So I can call CQ, and we'll wait for the next transmission cycle. So I've clicked enable transmit. This will enable your transmitter, and we're transmitting now. So I'm putting out a signal. It's transmitting. Transmit cycle is now finished. And now I'll wait to see if anyone responds to my CQ calls. It might take a little while. Now, one thing that I will note while we're waiting for a station to respond to my CQ call, you'll notice here that there is a power slider. Now, at the moment, mine's set at around 50%. So this is the transmit audio level into the radio. So there's a couple of things to note with transmit audio into the radio. You don't want to overdrive your radio too much. Now, there's an easy way to set this, and this is the way that I tell everyone who has WSJT-X to set it. You start transmitting. Oh, here we go. We've got VK4JJ's just responded. Adjust the power level slider here in WSJT-X so that the ALC on your meter is at minimum or just a few bars at maximum, because you don't need a lot of ALC. You don't need it overdriving the radio because you'll cause distortion and all sorts of artifacts. In fact, here on the band here, I think this is some sort of artifacting going on over here. So some sort of distortion being caused just here. So that's probably as a cause of because of overdriving the radios. Another way to make sure that your signal is clean and that you're not generating harmonics and rubbish all over the band is to go and turn on split operation. So if you go to File, Settings, go to your radio, and if it supports it, you can select Rig or Fake It. Now, why is this important? Well, I'll refer to the FT8 Operating Guide, which I'll put a link in the description below to, which gives you a lot of information in regards to FT8. But basically, this guide here says that depending on where your red goalposts sit above the waterfall, this function automatically adjusts both the radio VFO frequency and the audio frequencies so that the generated FT8 audio tones are toward the high end of the normal frequency range of SSB speech. Any audio harmonics then are more likely to be attenuated by the rig's transmit shaping filters, resulting in a cleaner, non-spooky, ghost-free transmitted signal. So that's basically what split operation means. That's if you set it to rig. If you need to, if your rig doesn't support it, you can select Fake It. And what this does is the Fake It settings automatically adjusts VFO-A to compensate for the different audio frequencies. So rather than using split VFOs on your radio, it will do it on one VFO and it will just adjust your frequency accordingly. Here we go. I've got this Israel station calling me now, and you'll notice here, so I just made a contact with the VK4JJ, and we finished. So I'll go through this. So now 4X1YS has called me with his grid square. I've responded to him and I've said you are a +3 dB above the noise, which is a very strong signal. In fact, I can hear it in the speaker. Now let's see if he has got that. He said, Roger, I am -15. So I now send Roger, Roger 73. And that's the contact. The contact is now complete. And if he receives my Roger, Roger 73, he will send back 73s to me as well. So there we go. We've just made a contact to Israel. I've just worked a new DXCC I haven't worked before. So that's he was calling CQVK earlier on here too. So as easy as that. That's one contact. You can make lots and lots of contacts. So just a note on power levels. Some people get a little bit hung up on how much power you should be running or shouldn't be running sometimes. Now, being a weak signal mode, some people think that means QRP power only. Not necessarily. A good rule of thumb is only use the amount of power that you require to make a QSO. Just get a feel for how much band activity there is and just see how strong the signals are at the moment. So you can see here on 20 meters, I've got quite a few signals that are really, really strong. So I don't need to run a lot of power to work these stations. I set my radio to about 20 or 30 watts, and that's all I really need. Now, of course, you can run high power. You could run 500 watts, a kilowatt, but all you're really doing is you're just being a nuisance on the band. You're probably going to cause splatter. You're potentially going to cause issues for nearby receivers that you might overload them because you'll be just so strong. And you're not necessarily going to be able to make the contacts because they might be able to hear you, but you won't be able to hear them because they're not running the same amount of power. So it's a delicate balance. Of course, that changes for things such as the high bands, 6 meters, 2 meters, and even above. Sometimes you need to run extra power because you need to be able to break through and be able to make that contact and make that QSO because the propagation is not there. So just gauge how much power you roughly need to be using based on the band conditions is a good rule of thumb. Okay, at the start of the video, I said that I was going to give you a little bit of a bonus tip on how I can tell what HF bands are open at one particular time using something, and that is GridTracker. Let me just start up GridTracker for you. GridTracker is a program which is interfaces with WSJT-X. I'll put a link in the description below and also to the setup guide, how you can set this up. But basically, GridTracker maps out the stations that you're hearing in WSJT-X, and you get a nice visual here on the map of the stations that you're hearing from your QTH and also stations that are currently in a QSO. So when you look here in WSJT-X, you can see all of this makes sense somewhat. If you know, I know that JA, I know that's Japan. EA5N, I'm not quite sure off the top of my head. Some of them popped up, if they're new and I haven't heard them before, they'll pop up with the country. But at least here, you can see on GridTracker exactly where all the stations are coming from. So you can see here, Europe is quite active here on 20 meters, and that's an instant view that I've got all of a sudden. So I can zoom in to Europe, I can hover over these grid squares and I can see the call sign, I can see the station that they're working, the reports that they've given them, and I can see the times. And it creates these nice visual lines for stations that are currently in a QSO at that particular time. So this is really, really good piece of software. I won't go into too much detail into this video. I might do a video on GridTracker in the future, but as again, I will put a link in the description to GridTracker. Let's just do a quick demo here. Let's change bands so we know 20 meters is open because the signals are really strong. Let's go to 15, and I don't know that 20 meters. I don't know if 15 meters is open. I can turn the volume up. I know it is. There we go. 15 meters, bang, all of a sudden we've got all these stations. Let me clear my log because that has stations which are previous. So I can see here, 15 meters, open to Japan, it's open to China, it's open to Thailand, it's open to Indonesia. So these are all the stations I'm hearing. There's one station in Europe, LY2FN, and another station here in Russia. We've literally been on 15 meters for 30 seconds, and already I can tell where the band is open to. So that is how powerful GridTracker is. So I definitely recommend that you download it and that you use it with WSJT-X. WSJT-X has many different modes for different purposes. Now, I did a video for beginners on that, so you can click on that here. Also listed here is a video of me using WSJT-X, as I mentioned before, on 3.4 gigahertz. Now, that's quite a challenge, so check out that video over there, and I'll see you on those videos. 73 for now.